Okay, two agenda items in closed session. One TTO update, and then the second one is our Willow Springs property discussion. So we'll start with the TTO update. Let's transition to the next agenda item, which is our Willow Springs property. So back in January, Brian. Oh yeah, we'll bring Anderson in a second. Actually, let me go and call him now. That way,
312.
I got it.
You got it over there?
Yep.
Hello, this is Eris.
Hi, Eris. It's Brian. How are you?
Hey, good, Brian. How are you?
Good. We're in closed session with the board. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Actually, I should have called you 15 minutes ago because we just finished a quick TTO update. So Eris has obviously been working on that too. But we're transitioning to the discussion on our Willow Springs property. And so for the board.
Sounds good.
Back in January, Brian and I had given the board a brief history of the property when it was purchased, some appraisal values. And I actually printed off a little more. I sent you guys the letter of intent that the board received about a month ago, but I also did a little digging and printed off a hard copy that's in front of you now. The first part is at least from what we can tell, is an official appraisal history, which ranges from 1981 to 1.85 million, all the way up to 2003 for 10 million. And so over the last, during my 8 years here, and certainly in January when we were talking through this with the board, I think we always kind of had in mind that it was, using inflation, probably a $15 to $20 million piece of property. Well, of course, in March, we received a letter of intent from Bridge Industrial for a price of $65 million. So a couple of goals for tonight. Obviously, sharing that letter of intent with the board is priority number one. And then also being able to have Eris with us to see if there are any questions from the board on just how a potential sale would look and work. But the other part of this is I put together, just doing a little history lesson on this. LT's Board of Ed went through a pretty significant moment from 2004 to 2006, and they prepared for a sale. It was a 2-year process. And just looking at the memos and everything that I was able to dig up, it involved, public hearings first. It involved engaging with the real estate law firm, also with the real estate consulting firm, meetings with the Village of Willow Springs officials on the zoning piece of it, CASARTA projections, which are enrollment projections. And then about 2 years into it, the trail just goes cold. And my speculation is that the district got to a point with the Village of Willow Springs and the Pleasantdale Park District, which owns a little cutout on this property. I think there was a major conflict there and dispute. Probably also got some backlash from homeowners in that area, and it kind of died. So didn't go any further. So I think that the purpose of tonight really is obviously we shared the letter of intent, really open it up for discussion and see what questions the board has about the letter, the property, what, if there's interest, what would the next steps be. And we're certainly not going to solve any of this tonight. It's probably just generating a list of questions more than it is answers at this point. Brian, Eris, did I miss anything there?
I don't think so.
So right now, is this communication private? So it's not like public knowledge to the public?
So that's a great question.
On their end, from sharing, filing or whatever.
If somebody were to dig around with
Right.
behind this, it's not.
Well, I actually asked this question of Franzik last week because before I emailed it to you guys, I wanted to make sure it wasn't foiable. The reality is it is foiable because once they sent it to us, it's a foiable document. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's the way to answer that is if someone out there knows about it, they could FOIA the document. It could become public knowledge. But any discussions on it would still happen in closed session.
Okay, thank you.
at what point would, if we're going to consider it, would we get an appraisal?
Eris, you want to answer that?
I didn't really hear the question that well. Would you mind repeating it?
So if we were to decide to go to the next step, at what point would we get an appraisal?
Well, I think that would be pretty early in the process. I think what you need, if the board is inclined to explore this, I would recommend you get an appraisal for two reasons. One is you need your own sort of test of the market to see $65 million is a very big number, and that works out to like $18.70 a square foot. But that may be a lowball number. You know, I mean, the property that recently traded in McCook, that former Electromotive, was bought by the same outfit, this bridge development, and they paid over $24 a square foot before incurring the costs of doing all the demolition and site prep. So I think it would behoove you to get, again, if you have any interest in looking into this further, I think it's worth getting an appraisal under the parameters that Bridge is proposing, you know, industrial development, that sort of thing. A, to help with decision making, and then B, if you do go ahead and move forward with either a sealed bid or a public auction, it is the prudent move to have a minimum price in your documents, and that is often tied to the appraised value.
A former coworker works at this place, and I know I don't know. At Bridge, yeah. They've at least doubled in size. Industrial is the hottest sector right now. Everybody's just building distribution facilities, so it doesn't surprise me. I had 8 questions. Jill asked 1. Can I run through some of them, or would someone else who has fewer like to begin? I'll get it.
Well, just
Go ahead,
quick.
Michael.
So I didn't realize that it was like industrial. I thought it was like residential. So this would be industrial.
Yep.
Okay.
They'd have to do rezoning, is my understanding.
Yes.
Okay.
No, no.
Hand it forward.
Are there any restrictions on using the proceeds from the sale? If we, let's say in this scenario, we're gonna end up transacting for $65 million at close, thereabouts. Any restrictions on how or when we'd use the proceeds?
If there were some outstanding debt in connection with the purchase of this property, you'd have to satisfy that debt first, whether it was a loan or bonds or something. But given that the board has owned this for decades, my understanding is going back to the 1950s, you would not have that kind of a limitation, and it would be subject to prudent use by the school board for educational purposes, but you would have a lot of latitude with that.
Okay. Is there any impact that's like statutorily required on like the tax base? Is there any sort of legal, I'm thinking of like a return of capital to investors, but like return of tax dollars to the community? No.
Yeah, so there is not. Now that begs the question of whether the board would say, we want to do some kind of meaningful abatement with a portion of these proceeds to sort of get to your point in terms of that return of capital issue, but there is no legal requirement that somehow you go back in time and say, we paid $2 million for these almost 80 acres 70 years ago. Just applying CPI, it's worth $15 million now, or 20 or 30. There's no requirement that you have to do anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Harris, what did you mean by abate? What does that mean when you said we could do some abatement?
Yeah, so abatements are frequently done by school boards for a variety of reasons, but typically it's essentially reducing your levy for a particular year and thus collecting less on your extension as some form of essentially a tax break for the community. It's often done out of the debt service fund for school districts that have outstanding debt because it doesn't affect your PTEL limiting rate. Some districts are doing it. They're abating the recapture amount that's new under that Section 18233. There's a lot of reasons school boards do abatements, but in its essence, it's a return of some of the money that you approved the levy on and then essentially walked back a part of it and are extending less.
Okay.
This is probably more for Brian. And Brian, how would such a sale at this price point impact the potential upcoming bond issuance and perhaps future issuances? Might there be a scenario where we bypass, if we're on a typical, 10-year cycle, we would skip this one, maybe even the next one, perhaps, depending on the use, what we do with the proceeds?
I think we would have options, right?
I don't want to be so loud. I'm trying to be loud for you.
No, I think there would be options available, right? It's do you use this plus the 10-year bond issuance money, or do you use one or the other?
Yeah.
Those are options the board would have.
A sale like this does not preclude the board from still selling bonds
Okay.
at the upcoming, I suppose, regular time that has been done, which would be in 2023, 2024. So it could be, as Brian said, a combination of the sale plus bond sale, or you can say, well, we're not going to sell the bonds now. However, there are ramifications if you don't sell the bonds. And
Yeah.
the ramifications to the tax levy are such that now that drops down.
Okay.
And then and look, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but what ends up happening then is when if we decide 3 or 4 years later, 5 years later, that we do want to sell the bonds, now you're rolling a large dollar amount back onto the tax roll, plus any additional monies from the increase of the consumer price index, all that sort of thing. So then you're kind of seeing sort of this roller coaster potentially with your tax levy.
Okay.
I hate to mess with that. It's like such a great thing going that I would hate to
the 10-year
disrupt
bond
that every
issuance,
10-year
That's a great
issuance.
point.
Yep.
I know it's early, but Brian, do you and the team have ideas as to how we might be able to reinvest or spend $60 to $80 million? I mean, is there a viable use of proceeds to? And I can't imagine you have an answer of yes today. Like, could there be an exploration done?
I mean, the
Could this
first
be
thing
the
that comes to
windfall
mind is
that-
capital projects, right? Like
Yeah.
renovations, additions, like that's really what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And just to think about it from a timing perspective, we're going to pretty quickly roll from strategic planning into facility strategic planning in the fall, because we're doing that anyway because of the 10-year bond issuance coming up. So
Oh, sure.
we
Okay.
need to do a community engaged process where we get stakeholders around the table and prioritize what gaps we have with our facilities, what needs we have, and that's hopefully should inform the decisions the board makes on how to spend the 10-year bond issuance, which we need to be doing that about a year from now. Because a year from this coming December is when we'll sell the bonds, and then 2 years from this summer is when the work happens. And so the timing is, I'm going to put a target out there and say by winter break, we want to have a facility strategic plan completed, so that we can use it next spring to make decisions on what to fund,
Okay.
what projects to fund.
Did I understand that that work would begin summer of 2024 then?
The work would happen in summer 2024.
It would begin.
It would
Yeah.
begin. Yeah.
For whatever we endeavor to fund.
So, like for example, the last time we did it was cafeteria at North Campus, Reber Center. That work all started in June of 14 and was completed in March of 15. So that was our first year.
Yeah.
So same thing.
It was the whole first year essentially is what it was.
So basically 24, 25 is when the work happens. But preparing for that really starts next year.
Okay. And population studies, what's the
CASARDA, yeah.
How stale is the information? We talked about it.
It's pretty stale.
4 months ago.
We need to do that probably regardless of any decision
Okay.
here to prepare for a potential sale. But yeah,
Do you guys have a gut feeling or a recommendation?
my gut feeling is we've been 4,000 students for the last 40 years. I can't imagine it showing that
Yeah.
we would be much different than
I
4,000
I
moving
think
forward.
everything that I've heard too is that the elementary schools are kind of
Leveled off. Yeah.
compared to
People left Illinois as a
Yeah.
state. And Brian, do you and the team have a reaction that you care to share? Is it premature? Do you want more questions first, or do you want more discussion first?
I think we need way more discussion,
Way
number
more, okay.
one. But I also think that just looking at the process the last board went through in 04, it's really making that decision, do we start that? Because it involves, just full eyes wide open here. This is going to be major community backlash, especially from the Willow Springs community. We go into that knowing that. But then all of the steps, right? Looking at real estate consulting firms and looking at CASARDA projection studies. I put in here, they did an archaeological study on it as well to be accommodating to that piece. And it was 2 years worth of public hearings and discussions.
So that was my first question that popped in my head is how do we balance opportunity for the district then with what this does to that community? You know, do we in all of this, do we have an idea of what does it do to their property values? You know, what could we expect from a project like this to try to buffer around the center? I mean, I don't know. This is all over your wheelhouse, right? So, I don't know.
Well, we know that there are about 15 houses that back up to this property.
Okay.
And there are 2 houses, rather large houses that were just built that actually face it. And then probably, I don't know, there's got to be 20 to 30 other homes that are in the area that aren't adjacent to it, but are in that neighborhood.
It's going to be quite effective.
I think generally speaking, if you put some sort of an industrial facility there, or warehouse, it's not going to raise their property value. Let's put it that
Well,
way.
no, I know, but how do you?
Generally
That's why you go through
right?
the zoning, though.
Okay.
That's
well-
why you go through the hearings.
And that's
in Willow
another issue.
Springs.
That's another issue too, because it is currently zoned residential.
Well, no, but it's when I pulled it up though, it was residential with you could have it for like a senior. It was like an R2, I think it was. Remember,
It
I
is.
had sent it to you.
It is.
It was residential, but then it had some other.
That was the
classifications
intent
for-
in '04 was a over 55 community.
Right.
So Erickson Development had approached the board at the time and wanted to put a retirement.
Right, because
center.
it had like it was residential, but then it had some other. It wasn't just straight residential, like you could put like senior housing or something like that there, but not commercial.
Or industrial. I
Right,
mean, depending
exactly.
on what has-
So
and
it would
I-
have. Right, I would say like it's a far stretch. I mean, it's not like open and shut because you'd have to get. Even if we approved it, I mean, just speaking as a real estate attorney, like, you know what I mean, you would have to say, even if you approved it, Willow Springs and those surrounding around would have to go to a public hearing
Yeah.
and approve it. So it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways I look at it like it's off of our hands. I don't know.
There's
Just-
also, and the Park District is a key player here because they have that little notch
Right.
in the middle of it. And
I mean-
they've approached us before about possible access roads and partnerships and stuff that just never
That's
panned
right.
out. But they would be major players in this.
So, I mean, I think that we should look at least the appraisal, just so that we are informed ourselves about the property, because at one point or some point it is most likely going to get out. And then we're going to have to deal with the fact that people are asking us, well, if it's 65 million or if it's 80 million or, whatever it is, that we just have to be prepared to be able to
Have done our
No.
due diligence, I think.
what the value is, and then too, if we are not, we have to know either way, like some kind of strategy about how we're going to address this or how it is addressed with the community. Either way. So like either way you have to have some scenarios or steps of how to be able to like kind of crisis deal with this, because it's going to be, as you said, a big issue either way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
and I completely agree with you.
And I would say at this point in time, if we were to go forward with it, this is when we would need to bring in a PR firm,
right.
like from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean to say.
Or something like that. you know?
Something, because I mean, and if we're standing to net, I mean, I would think 65, especially just from the numbers he threw out, is low. I mean, obviously,
They
it's
paid
just
91. This same company paid 91 million.
right. They're just throwing out a
similar
number.
size,
and they're like their earnest money is very low, and they're 10,000. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's so significantly low, I would think. But in any event, you're just putting out this. I mean, like it's enough money that you're dealing with that you could have a PR firm.
Yeah.
To have because I personally think there'd be enough benefits, especially from your tax basis, that you would get from a commercial, industrial, spot that would be huge, rather than homes going in there with more students coming in. That this could be very beneficial, but how do you sell it, especially for like, you could put barriers around it, but what about the homes across from it? And how, but like I said, you go to a public hearing. I mean, I just think a PR firm would be to guide us.
Well, I think that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Leslie.
When do we have to?
Maybe another minute or two, and then
sorry.
let's come back after
Yeah.
to finish up.
I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that it's not only it's a significant asset that we're sitting on for a lot of years. That I think on one side of the community and probably the large side of the community would say, if we don't have intentions, we don't believe we're going to need that land to build another school, then shouldn't we be accessing that revenue for the benefit of our students? That I would expect that to be the bigger side, because the bigger side of our community is not going to be directly impacted.
Right.
And then there's the tax revenues that it would draw each year too, which I think would be higher if they were. I'm looking at you, Jill, because this is out of my wheelhouse, but wouldn't they be higher if they were residential than if they were industrial, or Brian?
No, they would be higher if it's commercial industrial.
Industrial.
They pay in Cook County. They're gonna pay closer to 23% of their EAV versus 10% for residential.
Okay.
And it would actually be, and that's a way to sell it to the Willow Springs too, that their taxes, like when you think about it, you can chime in, but my thing, like when you look at somebody like Countryside with all the car dealerships and everything like that, they have a lower tax base. You could have the same house in LaGrange and the same house in Countryside, and their taxes would be less.
Right.
Because they have a lot more industry and those kind of things. So that's a positive. There's ways to do positive. That's why you need a PR
Yeah.
person to spin it
Yeah.
to make it positive for people. So maybe, but
Yeah.
that's,
I also want to dig a little bit into, Eris, you mentioned 211 that just sold property that they had purchased for a fifth high school 2 years ago.
They did, yeah. They sold it right before COVID. It was like a 60 or 65 acre site. It was purchased in the 60s for a high school that the district decided it was not going to need. And, one of the big issues is what the board's talking about now, is how to talk about what is going to happen with the proceeds with the community. So it isn't perceived as this big windfall that should somehow either reduce your levy or be distributed out as an abatement. So what the board's talking about is hugely important in terms of how to talk about, why you're doing it and what you're going to do with the proceeds of the sale, if that's the route you take.
And if we engage in this, and we open it up, we have to open it up to other potential buyers that want to purchase it. Which at that point, could it just as easily be residential or industrial? Could it go either way at that point?
Yeah, it's how it's zoned, right? So,
Yeah.
and just so you guys know, I had responded, this Mike Androwitz, who sent the letter of intent, I had responded to him initially and just said, thank you. Basically, we will do our due diligence to share this with the board. And I think I gave him like 30 days and said I would get back to him. He called me last week. And obviously, I was pretty coy. But I asked him, what homework have you done on the property from a zoning perspective? And he said, we've done enough to be pretty confident we can get it rezoned commercial. So
But they couldn't get it, if they rezoned it commercial, would that negate any other buyers for buying it as residential if we put it up for sale?
Well, I guess in theory they would do the same thing. They would try to purchase it knowing with some
They
level
would
of
be part of
confidence.
their due diligence.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Do you get it rezoned and then go get more bids or open it up, or do you get more
We would
bids
have to
and then-
rezone it to get more bids to have it be
That's
commercial.
my question, and I'm curious about that. Hey, Eris, this is Brian Stachek.
Yeah.
Quick question for you. So does the rezoning piece of this, does that ever fall on the current owner, or does it fall onto the buyer?
It's all the buyer's responsibility. And so in a sense, if the board were to undertake this process, you would do either sealed bid or a public auction. Once you had your buyer identified and they signed the contract and the board approved the contract, that's when all their due diligence windows open up. So they're going to do both, environmental sort of soil boring type due diligence. And then the bigger part is getting approvals through the municipality. And at that point, the school district is really more of an observer in the sense of Bridge or Duke or Panettone or, whomever wound up being the high bidder would then go to the village and they would make the case as to why it should be rezoned industrial, and the type of development they were pursuing was good for the village. So it's really their responsibility entirely. There'd be no closing, no.
Well, I mean, she has a point that she goes on and on just to. It was like, oh God, I was like,
Well, and sometimes.
oh God.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I was trying to not have 2 coffees a day.
No.
I'll do it.
No,
Right?
Making the ultimate determination if you want to keep the property. Will you need this 80-acre parcel? Is there some scenario under which you could potentially be building a third campus? Will public education change in some dramatic fashion that having this additional land will be an asset that you'll need in the future? I mean, you've got to play all that out,
And getting an appraisal, is that a major step? One, does it open up kind of floodgates of people understanding and knowing that we're looking into this? And 2, is that something that's easy enough that we can get an appraisal to understand what the property is worth, to decide if...
Yeah, it's not a big deal. I would have the appraiser address the report to me, and then I would communicate with, Brian and the board sort of in closed session in terms of what the value is. It's just one approach to value. It's just vacant land, so it's sales comparison only. And then the big assumption the appraiser would have to make is that this property would get rezoned for some fairly intensive industrial use, whether it's a distribution facility or it's a cold storage or any of the things that are being built now in a significant way. But I think we could have an appraisal done in less than 3 weeks.
I mean, my finance hat, setting aside the concerns of Willow Springs residents and the community, is, and we just talked about this like 4 months ago, right? Like it seems to make sense if you have a use of proceeds. We have this unsolicited offer, which is a ton of money, right? And I don't want to. I guess I'd like to keep speaking for myself, an open mind about it. It seems like, okay, we might not have everything figured out today as to what we'd spend it on, but how many more opportunities like this would we get? And is this the highest and best use of the property? Like I said previously, some of the residents in some of the areas that currently are geographically close to both campuses are never in their right mind going to get on board with sending their kids to the far south end of our district. I can't see it. I don't think populations are growing. And I think I'd want to make sure, if we didn't want to tackle some sort of exploration, really having a real solid reason as to why we as a district might walk away from $65 million or more. And if it's that it's hard, and I'm not saying you're implying this, Brian, I'm hearing you say, acknowledge and educating us on this is not
I just want to make sure we all go into it eyes wide open,
I
right?
don't know that this school or board or previous boards have ever shied away from hard work. I do know we've got a lot going on, strategic planning, et cetera. But, industrial, like I said, industrial's hot right now. It may not always be hot. It made it through the pandemic better than any other real estate sector, I think, around. And there's a market for it. There's a willing bidder, at least. There's half a market. We would make the other half of the market. It's tough to come up with a reason as to why we would say no to it initially with me. But again, I'm open to hearing more and more about, we're going to lose the community. We're going to lose, we got to keep thinking of how others would view it and what we should do as stewards of capital. Because right now it's illiquid capital, but it's still an asset.
Right. I mean, so from what I kind of heard before, or just coming onto the board a while ago, not that much longer, but a while ago, was that, and when we were in the hands of the TTO, that there was concern in past boards not to necessarily touch the property and sell it, because then those proceeds would go into that fund. And there was concern that, obviously, that, now I don't know how true that is, but that was kind of one of the concerns in the past of boards. prior boards. So.
And now we don't have that consideration.
Right. So, but again, and also too was that this was like for like a rainy day fund kind of a thing. That if future boards needed it and we were in such like a dire kind of a financial position that they could potentially future boards could tap into it to sell the property to be able to access greater funds. No.
I think along with that, there's, just been a fear of giving up a real estate asset. That's been previous boards have had that conversation.
I think and I think there's a lot to be said about that there's a lot of prudence in holding on to real estate, but at the same time, there's definitely in my gut is saying that rainy day funds, are we being financially responsible by having a property that we really don't foresee needing or using in the future? So I think my only other thought on the property, and this is possibly a really dumb thing to say out loud, but bear with me, but is, I don't want to mess with the bond coming up and the every 10-year process. And this is what I don't really want to say out loud, but it's like, do we need the money? Do we want that kind of money, and can we utilize that properly at this time? And I think that's something to be thinking of, and if there are amazing things that we can do that we can actually get done in a specific amount of time and utilize that money for the greater good of the students, and I think that is financially responsible. But I know that's a strange thing to say, can we use the money, but I don't want to have this money and then have a bazillion dollars in reserves, because I don't think that's good at all.
Yeah, I see.
So we just have to have that.
What were you saying?
I see both sides of what you're saying too. So two questions first. One is, there's no, I'm assuming, but is there any obligation, Eris, I'm speaking to you or Brian, is there any obligation by which we're obligated to use the funds if we were to liquidate this? No. And then the second question.
There is not.
Okay.
No.
And then the second question is, it kind of goes back to where we left off when I was asking about industrial versus residential zoning. If we have buyers that come in that are able to rezone this appropriately for residential zoning, that's going on my mind is like, if it's residential zoning, what could that do to our enrollment? And so I guess that's kind of the potential flag there. What latitude do we have in accepting an industrial bid versus a residential bid, even if the residential bid might be a bit larger than the industrial bid?
Well, you have a lot of latitude. I mean, remember that even though this offer is from Bridge, when the property, if the board decides to put the property up for sale, you would have to advertise it, in a newspaper of general circulation for 3 weeks in a row. The word would be out there. So even though Bridge may be getting this process rolling, you would have other bidders that would participate that are doing the same kind of thing that Bridge is doing. Maybe Amazon is interested. Maybe UPS would bid because they could pick up some additional land directly across from what they already have. I mentioned Duke earlier, Brennan Investment, Panattoni. These are firms that Dermody, the people who bought or are buying the Allstate campus in Northbrook, and their plan is to demolish those buildings and build industrial. So there's a lot of players that would be very interested in this. So all this would do you'd be inviting bids from anyone who is interested, including a potential residential bidder. Now, whether they could really compete at this price point for what Bridge is offering, only time will tell. My guess is the land is worth a lot less residentially zoned than it is industrially zoned. But you could pick whoever you wanted. I mean, they would have to meet the parameters of the board's resolution. We would have terms and conditions of sale attached to the resolution. But at the end of the day, you could pick no one, or you would have some control over the destiny of the property. Let's put it that way.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot. And the other piece that I agree with what you all said, everybody that's talked so far, I agree. I feel, when did we acquire this property?
1954
Yeah.
Yeah.
50s and 60s.
for like
Late 50s, early
$350,000.
So if you had said like 1985 or 1992, I probably was going to say, at some point it becomes irresponsible that we just continue to sit on it if we really don't believe that we are going to need it for an additional school, which I am guessing by some of the comments here, we really don't believe that we're going to need this as an additional school at this point. So I do agree that I think at some point it becomes irresponsible. And if we go through this process and the community votes it down, to your point, I think, Michael, earlier, or somebody, I think it was you, Michael, it's out of our hands at that point, and the community has spoken, but at least we've done the right thing. Or Jill, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, I don't care.
At least we've done the right thing in exploring the opportunity for the interests of our students. As far as spending the money goes, I mean, you talked about a facilities review. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that will be
I know, it's just more of
What?
timing wise.
Unfortunately, you don't believe what?
I don't think that's going to be a problem.
I was going to say, like, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. I mean, and I think after we mentioned step one being an appraisal. Step two, I think, has to be a CASARDA projection, so we can confidently say we don't project a need for this space at all moving into the future. The other assumption is that at the end of this facility study, it's going to highlight severe facility needs on both of our campuses. It just is. I mean, when you compare, and they're not touched by the 20 to 22 million we're able to spend every 10 years through bond issuance. They're just not. I mean, if you look at, it's not rocket science, right? Every school district I know has spent about $150 million within the last 10 years on major renovations to their campuses.
Oh, wow.
And that's, I mean, I know one of the first things that Jen Rowe said when she walked in here in September was that this campus alone has major accessibility issues. I mean, we have $1 million need for a new elevator, right?
Yeah.
We have, I mean, if you look at our locker rooms, our restrooms, this campus alone has accessibility issues. We know that we also want large common spaces with flexible seating. We have neither of those at either campus. We know we have, fine arts and athletic facility needs that just, I think I'll say this as simply as I can. We have amazing staff, we have amazing students, we have amazing parents and community, and our facilities are 30 years behind. They just are.
Agreed.
And so I don't think the sell to our community would be difficult from my perspective, but you guys know way better than I would on that, that it would be difficult to sell that we need major facilities renovations here.
Well, how exciting then. I
Well,
mean,
and
that's
So
what I was
that's kind of the,
I guess
but
the
again,
question
I
of
think
this-
that's why we do the legwork to say appraisal, CASARDA projection, we're moving into a facility study, and we should be able to have some really good documents and information on needs.
And my concern would be is where will we be in 5 years with the market?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Are we going to let this opportunity pass us by? I mean, let's just, for 65, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, maybe it's more like 85 or no matter where we are. But, I mean, we are at an all-time high. And if you look at how we've gone, I mean, where will we be in 10 years? 10 years, it might be 35, and we've let this opportunity go. I mean, are we going to get any higher? I don't know. Maybe we could. But who wants to roll that dice? And this is the time.
Yep.
I mean, and this is, I mean,
And to Brian's point earlier about whether, I think this question came up, how does it impact the ability to issue bonds every 10 years? It doesn't, and so you can combine those two,
Yeah.
right? If the board's
Keep
interested in that, you combine both the sale plus the 10-year bond issuance, and now we're able to do a significant renovation to both campuses.
And we're able, I guess my biggest concern on the spending is, do we have the time and I always hear how we have such a limited amount of things we can do.
Right.
That
Yeah, this
we were
would
limited on
be
the
over several
industry,
years.
and so
It would have,
be-
just for operational purposes, it would have to be over several years.
So in the case of a bond sale, you generally have 3 years to spend the money. With something like this, it's kind of open-ended with these dollars. But a bond sale, you have generally 3 years.
You're talking logistics, like we only have
Yeah.
10 weeks to
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I'm always hearing, but I guess with something this big, it would be taking down parts
Several
of the
summers,
schools. And
Yep.
it'd be taking down part of the school year or
Yep.
something
Yep.
during that. So I
Like
mean,
if you think about 10 years ago or 8 years ago now, we moved the cafeteria over to Von Gym, and that was the cafeteria for 8 months while this whole area was torn
Oh,
up. And
okay.
so there was just a lot of like logistics, moving people around, and that's what every district goes through when they do a major renovation. It's several years of growth. Yep.
With any big decision, I always go through a pro-con list, whether I try to or not. It's in my head or it's on paper, but again, I want to kind of keep an open mind and not get too excited. This deal isn't closed. These guys could have made an offer. They could find that there's contamination in the soil. They don't want to touch it. Whatever. There's going to be all these conditions to close that may not happen. But I feel like it would be hard or help me understand, going when we meet again on it. What is the story to the community that we said, we're not even going to look at this? Like, what's the rationale?
that's why we bring in-
I think it's
Yeah.
tough
Yeah.
to.
How do you justify that?
100% agree.
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
because I know there's a lot of excitement. I'm like, oh, here comes all this money. Dream big. Let's do it. But we should always be playing devil's advocate in something so big. Like, what are the drawbacks? You've raised some good community concerns and others.
Well, I
but-
think one of the other drawbacks too that we still have to determine is the fact that and I think, Eris, we talked about this. There's a parcel or two in there that we don't own,
Yeah.
and that's right on Willow Springs Road.
And they know this from the offer that they've made.
I don't know.
Eris, you and I didn't get a chance to talk about this yet, but when I was doing the chronological history from like 04 to 06, when the previous LT board went down this road, that trail ends in 2006, and there were some memos in there about the Pleasantdale Park District going through the eminent domain procedures, as well as the Hess property, which ultimately ended up LT buying. So I haven't honestly dug more into that, and I don't know that I'll be able to because there's not a lot of records here. But there was something that happened in February of 06 that dealt with, I think the reason this stopped was because of potential conflict with the Village of Willow Springs and the Pleasantdale Park District.
I mean, that may be, Brian. I mean, one thing we could do, and ultimately, if you are going to do the sealed bid or public auction, two things you will want. In addition to the appraisal, which is more like internal decision-making tool, would be a title commitment to confirm the district's ownership of the two 40-acre parcels, more or less. It's slightly under 80 acres total. Because the pins they've listed in their letter of intent, 5 of those are wrong. They're only wrong by a couple digits, but they listed the wrong section numbers. So I was checking them earlier today. But we'd want to confirm ownership. The other thing I would get, and you could probably get it fairly quickly from your architect, is a survey of the property. Because any bidder is going to want to know, A, that you have title, and B, have a survey to look at for purposes of, what's there, what right-of-ways are there, what easements are there, what's there that they can't see with their own eyes, but are sort of legal restrictions, stuff like that.
I could call in my surveyor guy. Could probably get, because they're so backed up.
Right.
But you could probably
Okay.
get something.
is there any benefit in me talking or contacting Mark Para and finding out a little background? Is that dangerous?
I've thought about that with calling Dennis Kelly, the 2 previous superintendents, or 10. I have concerns about that. I think that would. I think a lot of people would know
Son-in-law.
immediately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Son-in-law
And
daughter
even
in
if
the
those
district.
were the concerns then, or how it fell apart, we still come down to, like, can we really not approach this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or in good faith, knowing that we've been sitting on that property for 70 plus years,
Yep.
should we approach this?
But couldn't you tell from the I don't even think you need to pay for the survey, because the survey would be thousands. You could probably just pull it from a title commitment And Mike, I just
One suggestion, if I can make a suggestion too, that it might not be a bad idea to just sit down with the folks from Bridge Development and talk to them and learn about what they have in mind for the property. There's nothing to preclude you from doing that, and it might be helpful to them just to educate them on how a school district in Illinois, what the requirements are to sell property. Now, I'd be very surprised if they didn't know that there's this bidding process or the sealed or a public auction, but maybe they don't. And then we can ask questions too. You know, what do you have in mind? How are you going to deal with the homeowners on the west side? What sort of buffering do you have in mind? You know, what is the plan? How many buildings? How many square feet of building? Keep that in mind. There's nothing to preclude you from talking to Bridge. That might help the board make a more educated decision on, you know, how feasible is this? Is it something you really want your property to be put to, that the type of use they have in mind?
And I think as a board, we also need to talk about the cost to even pursue it. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I think if you talk to Bridge, you need to talk about what is your, because how much is, you know, somebody to do an appraisal? Because the title commitment should be free, but your surveys, you're thousands and thousands of dollars when you're looking at it. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I just ordered one for like, you know, an acre down on Wolf, and it was like $2,500. So if you're looking at that, that's where you're looking at your big expense. Like, how much do we as a board want to, and if we're
put
looking
into
at a
this.
PR firm, do we want to authorize, would be my thought, are we comfortable with to even pursue it? Does that make any sense? Are we talking $50,000 to $100,000? Are we comfortable with to even pursue it, if that's what we're requiring? Is there or is there a workaround, a different way to do it a little bit cheaper?
We could certainly explore what the cost, the initial exploration cost would be, and bring that back to you guys. And
I mean, that would be my.
Sure.
because certainly, yeah, the survey, the appraisal, the title commitment, the CASARDA projections, there's going to be a cost to those. So we can gather some of those and bring those back to the main meeting.
I mean, not to say that I'm not supportive of it, but that's just I think to be fully
Yep.
eyes wide open.
I mean, that's what we would do
it.
first anyway, right?
What?
That's what we would do first anyway. So that's not.
So nobody's shocked that all of a sudden we're at 100,000.
Right.
And where did that go? Is that?
Yeah.
Eris, are you suggesting, though, talking to Bridge to get even an understanding if we're interested, or just...
Well, I think you might learn something about what they have in mind, and if whatever they have in mind, the market generally is going to have in mind. I mean, I think they would be a proxy for any other comparable type of developer, some of the other names I've mentioned. And so I don't see a lot of, you're not committing yourself to anything, and it would really be an educational meeting both for the district and the board, and to confirm with Bridge that they understand that, we can't just sit down and draw up a contract and enter into it with them. This thing has to be advertised. It has to be made available to the public. The board has to vote by a 3/5, majority to find that it's no longer necessary for your purposes, and you can now sell it. They might not know all that, and I think there would be some mutual learning from a meeting with these folks. These guys are the pros. I mean, they know what they're doing. They're an extremely successful organization, and I think that it might be beneficial. Just something to consider.
I love that approach.
Could we do that before even?
Yeah, I think. I would
Working
think
too
we
hard
could
on
put
anything
together
else.
for the next couple of weeks.
So but a meeting like that, though, would be public record, right? So we would have to have a comms plan in place ahead of time.
When you say public record,
Like FOIA-able?
yeah.
Well, no, wait, what's that?
FOIA-able?
Well, no, I mean, don't we would have to, wouldn't we have to say?
Couldn't it be enclosed?
No, it wouldn't be like a
Brian
public.
and
It would
Brian.
really just probably be like me and Brian. I would say me and
Oh,
Brian
perfect.
Right,
Okay,
and
I'm
then-
sorry, I
right,
misunderstood.
Yeah.
and Eris maybe.
Right.
Like the three of us would sit
Yeah,
down
I would
with them.
have no more than 2 board members attend that
Right.
meeting, and then we don't have to worry about calling it an open meeting and invoking the OMA, things like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I misunderstood. I thought it was for the whole board.
So
I
maybe
love
do we
that
feel like that's the first step, and little reconnaissance, and then explore some costs, and then come back to the May meeting.
I mean,
with
and
them.
then like in that meeting, not even discuss counter to anything, just to get some more information.
Right, right.
Yeah. And then
And I'll tell you why I'm making this suggestion is not just before COVID, I helped Indian Prairie School District sell a piece of land, a little smaller than this, for an elementary school. And we had extensive discussions with the developer, and it was very helpful in developing the contract document, the terms and conditions of sale, and making sure that what was presented to the market was sort of had the most attractive market components, not just for that developer, but for developers generally. So.
that's great.
Great.
Okay.
We were just random. You said we bought this in '54, and that's about when we built South Campus. Did we?
Was it 50? Was it 54?
50,
It's
well-
early.
No, it was-
South Campus was built in 56. So this
So
was
it-
built right before that, or this was purchased
I
right
didn't know
before
if
that.
maybe anyone know if we bought when I know it was built in '56, but did it take 2 years to build maybe, or maybe it didn't. South Campus.
Oh, like, did we buy
Did we buy
both?
both parcels around in or around the
I
same
don't know.
time?
You know?
No, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Or I just wonder if the intent, back then it was, we need South Campus,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
boom,
Right.
here we go.
And I think our enrollment was like 5,300 at that
It
point.
was much larger
Yeah.
at that time.
And
Text
growing.
my aunt, but
Yeah.
we're still she was there.
We had a community member reach out to us in October and November about this property. I don't need to know details, but did you guys
I talked to him,
respond?
yeah, David May.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had this idea, and his name was actually in some of the memos that I reviewed back from '04. And his idea is to bank the money and create like an endowment or a foundation to fund scholarships and fund student programs and things like that versus capital.
He used to be president of 102.
Yeah, he was on District 102.
Board.
He's from Walsh Construction.
Okay.
He was one of their corporate counsels from Walsh,
Okay.
but also a huge facilities advocate.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
a large part of the reason that our facilities were so strong at District 102 because it was such his wheelhouse, and
Yep.
we had aging facilities likewise. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, okay.
So exciting.
So a couple
Alright.
of steps we'll take between now and May, and we'll come back in closed session at the May board meeting to.
I'd love
Continue.
if you could have 2 board members of,
Yep.
at the meeting. I think it would just be interesting for whoever goes.
The rest of the group, what do you guys think about that?
Fine with me.
That's legal. That's legal.
Yep.
We're saying,
Yeah.
right, too? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Do you,
Chat with Carrie and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Eris, thank you for waiting around for us.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Let me make one other suggestion. Do you want to get an appraisal going, or do you want to wait until the May meeting? It would be probably no more than $5,000. Like I said, land value only, sales comparison approach only. Just throwing that out there, just to help you with that bit of information.
It's a
I
board
like
thing.
it.
Anyone have concerns with that?
Yeah, I think we need to do it regardless.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's just good for, even if we don't move
Right.
forward, it's just good for our record keeping to have it.
If we haven't,
And the diligence
be
around
careful what
this.
we know.
Right.
I mean,
And all this is
If
like,
we know it,
I'm back.
we have
I
to
mean, I
live
know
on
we
that.
keep talking about that. Jill, I think you made a great point. Nobody knows where the market will be forever. We own the property today. This is, and it doesn't mean we have to spend any of the money. Maybe it does go into an endowment instead of facilities.
Or maybe some does. It doesn't.
Yeah, there's.
I
It's
mean,
not like,
you're not talking $1 million.
I feel like there are.
So can I throw out one thing about the funds? There is a doctrine known as excess accumulation, where the courts have set certain parameters for how much money a school district or any public body can have simply in the bank. And you will see certain what are known as tax rate objections and they're filed against most school districts, and Brian Stashak is familiar with them, challenging excess accumulations in transportation or O&M or funds like that. So it would be really important, if you were to sell the property, that you would have an identified plan. So someone who is looking at your books wouldn't see simply all this influx of $65 or $75 million. When they look, they would see that there is a plan to do this at North Campus, this at South Campus, a real capital improvement plan that would defeat that kind of a challenge. So just be mindful of that too. So
Eris, I think, is it 2 or 2.5 times that is generally considered to be illegal?
Yeah, so what the main case is called Central Illinois Public Service v. Miller from the late 60s, Illinois Supreme Court case. It says 2 to 3 times. The courts have narrowed that down a little bit, and most rate objection attorneys will look closely at anything where it's over 2, Brian.
Yeah.
And so the low-hanging fruit for these guys is where you have funds that have 4, 6, 8 times prior year's expenditures. If it's 2 or even 2.5, that's less of a concern.
Right. So what I was saying there is that generally the courts have held that it can be considered illegal if you have, 2 to 2.5 times the total dollar amount of your prior year operating expenditures. So if you had $80 million of total operating expenditures and you had $300 million in the bank, you're going to be in violation of that. But if you had another $80 million in the bank, you're going to be okay.
And with a plan.
Yeah.
With a plan to spend.
With a plan that I'm
Yeah.
sure can be modified
Yeah,
as
and,
well.
and
Yeah.
and you don't even have to have the plan as long as you're underneath those numbers.
Gotcha.
Right, that's correct, yep.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts before we take the next step and get ready for May?
But to reiterate the next step,
Appraisal. Everyone,
Appraisal.
no one has concerns with taking the first step of the appraisal. Getting a meeting on the books with Bridge, and then exploring some initial costs that would be a part of this, and doing those 3 things
and seeing
before
if
May.
you can avoid some of the costs too.
Yep.
Right, you know what I mean? What the cost would be and how do you have a workaround for some of them? Because I think you could get an easy workaround to see what he was
And-
talking about.
And we use appraisers all the time with theirs
Right.
when we're.
No,
We
I don't,
do,
I'm
yeah.
talking like a survey, like you could have like,
Yeah.
sketch it out just to,
Right.
as a favor, I could call that, and he could be like, here it is sketched out instead of, you
But
know,
like you said, we do
25.
use them all the time when we intervene in property tax objections. So,
Right, but for an appraiser, but I'm talking like for a survey. So I'm trying to say
Yeah.
like you could do, there could be a nice easy workaround to save you that.
Is there any concern with the 60 days that's noted in that letter?
Eris, do you have concerns about that? Let me go back to the.
When you say the 60 days of the due diligence period,
No, I think, are you talking, Dawn, under the purchase, under
Yeah.
4, under the purchase contract, which we don't have?
Yeah, maybe I missed.
they've listed, they have what they're calling a physical due diligence period of 60 days. Honestly, I would expect that to be longer, but this is when they're going to do a phase 1, maybe a phase 2, some soil borings,
Oh, this is-
determine the quality of the soil, whether it can bear the kind of improvements they have in mind. And then they've got 120 days to get all their entitlements, and they have the right to extend for 3 90-day periods. So 60 days for the physical due diligence, up to 210 days for the entitlements. That seems realistic to me.
Yeah, I apologize. I was thinking that there's 6 days was somehow tied to the timeline of this offer.
It was 3 days.
It was-
It's already gone.
It's already gone,
And
yeah.
so
Okay.
those was,
Yeah,
but
I
they're
was
calling
confused.
Brian.
That seems
so-
aggressive,
Yeah.
3 days.
3 days
Yeah.
is really aggressive.
Like on a
Okay.
Friday, they sent it, I'm saying.
Thank you. I apologize.
Yeah, it was
I
March.
confused that.
hey, Eris, what is a realistic time period for something like this from, start to finish to close? Is it a year? Is it 18 months? What is it typically?
Yeah, I mean, let's say let's say the board tonight said, let's do it. We want to do it. So we'd have to come up with terms and conditions, and we would use this letter of intent as a template because I think these are fairly market-oriented terms. And then the board at a meeting, say in May, would have to approve a resolution authorizing the sale. You would then need to publish in a newspaper 3 consecutive weeks in a row that you're planning on selling the property. So that would put us into, early June. And then you would set a date for either the auction to occur or the sealed bids to be opened. And then at a meeting following that, you would actually approve that particular buyer, sign the contract that they've already signed following the bid opening. And then these timelines would come into play. So let's say they needed all 210 days, and I wouldn't be surprised if so 60 plus 210 is 270. That's essentially 9 months, plus say 2 to 3 months to get the whole thing teed up. A minimum of a year, Brian, and maybe they end up, we do an amendment to the contract because they need a little more time for their physical due diligence. But certainly within 18 months, it would close, in my opinion.
Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And once those terms are decided upon, after that, it's all public. Because once the resolution is adopted at a board meeting, it's public, and then it's out in the open. So that's the...
Exactly, yeah. It would be, everything can be quiet until you actually put an agenda item on approving it for action. Yeah.
Okay.
Would it be that the board approved an exploration of sale, or would it be the board is approving a sale? Like,
Sounds
could
like
we still say no? If,
yeah,
'cause these guys will come back and be like, well, not 65 million. Now we're thinking 63. And then we took another look. It'll be 58. And at some point we may say, ooh, you're goofing with us here.
Eris, the board would be approving basically the terms of the potential sale, but we would write the terms in a way that basically gives a lot of flexibility to what ones we can accept or not. The board can accept.
Right, and typically, you know, on deals of this magnitude, you would normally put a minimum bid into the terms and conditions. So let's say we set it at 60 million, and no one is even close to that. Well, then the auction fails, the sealed bid process has failed, and you either decide to lower the minimum bid or you just stop and say, hey, this isn't working out like we planned, and let's just sit tight. We still own the land. Maybe something will change in 10 years, you know. You are never obligated to go forward until after the bidding process and the board approves it. You could bail up to that point.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions or thoughts? All right, we've got some next steps to consider then. Thanks, Eris. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a good evening,
All right.
everyone. Good
You-
night.
you good
Bye.
night. Okay. Let me close. Actually,
Just
we
one
wanna-
thing for calming down. All right, we need, time is now, we need a motion to adjourn.
Hold on, let me get my sheet out.
Oh,
So what
just
time?
kidding.
What time is it? 10?
10:20. 10:20.
10:20, oh boy. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And can we, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank